1 year ago this month, the bridge connecting Long Island to the Metro Boston mainland was closed because it was found to be structurally unsound. With 4 hours to get off the island, many people had to scramble to leave the overnight shelters, the halfway houses, rehab programs, and detox facilities in which they had been living. As our city struggled to find alternative facilities for over 300 displaced persons, one of the needs that came to the forefront was a place to store possessions. In addition to a safe place to sleep each night, the shelters on Long Island had lockers where items could be stored and accessed daily over a long period of time. Most emergency shelters in the city have very limited storage areas. So people seeking overnight shelter have to choose between sleeping inside while leaving their possessions unattended on the streets outside, or staying outside themselves with their bundles and backpacks. And during the day, there's nowhere to store the telltale signs of homelessness, so stigmatizing when going into a restaurant or a bank or to apply for a job. That's the reason that the lockable bins provided at Boston Warm have been so important. I tell this story in some detail so that we can appreciate an important part of the gospel we just heard. Jesus is leaving Jericho when a blind beggar named Bartimaeus begins to call out to him, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The disciples and crowd are annoyed. They try to silence the man, but he's undeterred. Jesus stops and tells those around him to bring the blind man to him. "Take heart," they say to him. "He's calling you." And Bartimaeus responds, Mark tells us, throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Biblical commentators have pointed out the significance of Bartimaeus' action as he responds to Jesus' call. Throwing off his cloak is hugely important. For a blind beggar, the cloak is essential to life. It's clothing, but it's also a tent-like structure against the weather. It's a bed, and it's the repository of whatever coins may be gathered each day. To throw off the cloak is to give up everything one has. This is Bartimaeus' equivalent of the response asked of the rich man a few chapters ago when Jesus challenged him, "Go, sell everything you have, and come, follow me." In today's terms, we would say Bartimaeus is all in. He responds to the invitation to come to Jesus because he believes that this man can change his life. He addresses him as Son of David, the first time that phrase is used in the entire Gospel of Mark. And Jesus responds. Unlike most people, us included, often, who pass by in disdain, or like this crowd, try to silence the man as an annoying nuisance, Jesus stops and calls him. Jesus acknowledges him as a person, and this gives Bartimaeus the courage to throw away the signs of his old life and trust himself to the healing hands of Jesus. Jesus doesn't say to him, "You have to throw away that filthy cloak to come into my presence." Jesus knows that what this man needs is acknowledgement of his humanity and help from the crowd to lead him to Jesus. So it's a story of multiple transformations. Throwing off his cloak, Bartimaeus comes to Jesus and regains his sight. And we also see the crowd change. At the beginning of the story, they're irritated with Bartimaeus. They try to prevent him from coming to Jesus. Jesus doesn't reprimand the crowd for their narrow-mindedness. He simply demonstrates a loving response. After he stops and asks for Bartimaeus, the crowd kind of begins to get it. They become the encouragers, the facilitators. "Take heart," they say to the blind man. "Get up, he's calling you." I like to think that they are bending down to help him up and leading him to Jesus. Lots of people are being cured of their own blindness as they learn how to move from being a hindrance to being a help. Their fears, their prejudices, their selfishness have been thrown aside. They can see Bartimaeus for who he is, a child beloved by God. Perhaps their own hearts are healed in this process. In this stewardship season, we think about how we respond to Jesus' call to each of us. God longs to heal the world, and the invitation to healing comes to each of us by name and to all of us collectively as God's beloved children. We think about the journey we make in response to God's care for us. We ask for the imagination to hear a call and the clarity to see what is hindering us in responding to that abundant love. As Jesus knew that wealth was keeping the rich man from his relationship to God, he knew that being hidden, wrapped in a cloak, was trapping Bartimaeus by the side of the road. And he knew that the crowd was being blinded by their habits and prejudices and fears. Is there something keeping you from God's healing? In her meditation entitled An Expedition to the Pole, writer Annie Dillard tells a harrowing story of misplaced priorities. In 1845, Sir John Franklin and 138 officers and men set sail from England in two three-masted sailing barks. They were looking for the Northwest Passage, a way to travel from the Atlantic Ocean across the Canadian Arctic to the Pacific. For the expected 2 to 3 year journey, each sailing vessel had an auxiliary steam engine and a 12-day supply of coal. In addition, each ship made room for a 1,200-volume library, a hand organ, backgammon and chess sets, china place settings for the crew, cut glass wine goblets, and sterling silver flatware engraved with the officers' initials and family crests. The expedition set out to great fanfare and with enormous style. But it did not achieve its mission. When winter closed in, the ships became trapped in the Canadian ice. None of the 139 men on those two ships survived the ordeal, dying of starvation and exposure over a huge area. For a period of 20 years after the voyage set out, native Inuit peoples came on horrible scenes of debris and dead members of the expedition on the frozen lands and ice floes near Baffin Island. Some saw the pack ice pierced by the stark, ghostly remains of 3 masts. Others found skeletons huddled in a tent, clothed in the tatters of uniforms with bright brass buttons. Another search party saw evidence that 2 men had dragged a heavy wooden lifeboat 65 miles across the ice. In that lifeboat with the skeletons were guns, chocolate, tea, china plates, and a great deal of table silver. What is weighing you down as you travel today? What possessions or fears or grudges are you dragging around? What's keeping you from responding to God's invitation? What parts of your old life will you throw aside? God's invitation is trustworthy. Jesus offers healing and new life. It may be hard sometimes to see him stopping to speak to us. Something or someone may be in the way. Part of the reason we are in community is so that we can help each other get past the roadblocks, recognize our blind spots, reach out a hand to support each other, acknowledge our fears, and together turn and face the light. That is what we do for and with each other by God's grace. Jesus showed the crowds how to become part of the solution as their own hearts were changed. Together we learn how to live as a beloved community so that reconciliation and healing are magnified and shared in all our lives. The healing we experience restores our relationships with each other. Together we see God's power working in us and become empowered to reach out to share that love. Our response to God's gifts transforms our understanding of what is and what is not fuel for the journey. And it energizes our desire to be part of a healing community, to support our common life so that together we are strengthened to embody Christ's love in the world. Bartimaeus was all in. Are you throwing off your cloak too? Bartimaeus found healing as he heard the voice of his teacher. He responded to the gift of new life, and he went with the one who showed him what love looks like. What's holding you back? Are you all in? Take heart. Get up. Jesus is calling you.